Lieutenant Sarah Chen stared at the ceiling of her apartment, watching the fan blades cut through the stale air. The clock on her nightstand read 2:47 a.m., but sleep had become a stranger to her months ago. Her left leg throbbed with phantom pain from shrapnel that doctors had removed 6 months earlier, but the real wounds ran much deeper than torn muscle and bone. The Army had declared her medically retired after 15 years of distinguished service. 15 years that had taken her from a fresh-faced recruit in basic training to one of the most feared special operations officers in the Middle East. Now, at 33, she was officially a civilian, though she felt more lost than she ever had in the desert wastelands of Afghanistan. Her phone buzzed with another text from her sister, asking if she was okay. Sarah deleted it without reading the full message. She had stopped answering most calls weeks ago, tired of explaining that she was fine when everyone could see she wasn't. The military pension kept her bills paid, but it couldn't fill the void left by a life that had revolved around mission briefings, tactical planning, and leading soldiers who trusted her with their lives. The local grocery store had offered her a job as a security guard. The manager, a well-meaning man in his 50s, had looked at her with pity when she declined. He probably thought she was too proud to take honest work, but the truth was simpler and more complicated. Sarah couldn't imagine standing in fluorescent-lit aisles watching for shoplifters, when her mind was still calculating escape routes and threat assessments everywhere she went. Her therapist, Dr. Martinez, had used words like adjustment disorder and complex PTSD, but Sarah preferred the blunt assessment her former commanding officer had given her during their last conversation. "You're burnt out, Chen. It happens to the best of us." Colonel Harrison had served 3 decades before retiring to a quiet life in Montana, and his matter-of-fact delivery had somehow been more comforting than all the clinical terminology in the world. The apartment felt smaller each day. Sarah had chosen it specifically because it was on the 3rd floor with only one entrance, positioned so she could see anyone approaching from multiple angles. Old habits died hard and some never died at all. Her neighbors probably thought she was paranoid. The way she checked her locks 3 times before bed and kept her curtains drawn during the day. She pulled herself off the couch and walked to the kitchen, stepping carefully to avoid putting too much weight on her injured leg. The refrigerator held leftover Chinese takeout and a 6-pack of beer with 2 bottles missing. Real gourmet dining for a woman who used to plan logistics for operations that fed hundreds of soldiers in hostile territory. The letter had arrived that morning, forwarded from her old base. Sarah recognized the handwriting immediately, though she hadn't seen it in over 2 years. Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez had been one of her most trusted team members, a young man from Texas who could navigate urban warfare like he was walking through his hometown. His letter was brief but urgent, asking if she had heard about the disappearances. 3 former special operations personnel had gone missing in the past month. All of them had served in the same theater as Sarah. All of them had worked on classified missions that officially never happened. Rodriguez was spooked, and it took a lot to rattle a man who had survived 2 tours in some of the most dangerous regions on Earth. Sarah had tried to dismiss his concerns as paranoia, but something nagged at her. The names he mentioned were all people she knew. Soldiers she had served alongside in operations so classified that even their families didn't know the details. Marcus Webb, who could speak 4 languages fluently and blend into any crowd. Diana Foster, a sniper whose accuracy was legendary among their unit. Tommy Nakamura, an explosives expert who could disarm improvised devices with his eyes closed. None of them had simply vanished without a trace in their civilian lives. These were people who knew how to disappear when they wanted to, but also people who understood the importance of maintaining contact with their support networks. The fact that all 3 had gone dark simultaneously wasn't a coincidence. She limped back to the living room and picked up her laptop, its familiar weight feeling strange in hands that once carried much deadlier equipment. A quick search revealed nothing useful about the missing soldiers. No news reports, no police statements, no family members pleading for information on social media. It was as if they had been erased from existence, which was exactly the kind of thorough work that required professional resources. The knock on her door came at exactly 3:15 a.m. 3 sharp raps followed by 2 softer ones. Sarah froze, recognizing the pattern immediately. It was a signal her unit had used in the field, a way of identifying friendlies in situations where voices couldn't be trusted. Her heart rate spiked as training and instinct took over, pushing aside months of civilian lethargy. She moved silently to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. The hallway appeared empty, but shadows could hide many things. Sarah grabbed the pistol she kept in a lockbox by her bed, checking the magazine automatically before moving toward the door. The familiar weight of the weapon in her hands felt like greeting an old friend. Another knock, same pattern. Whoever was out there knew exactly how to get her attention, which meant they either knew her personally or had done their homework thoroughly. Neither option was particularly comforting at 3 a.m. "Who is it?" she called softly, positioning herself to the side of the door where she wouldn't be visible if someone decided to start shooting through the wood. "Package delivery," came a voice she didn't recognize. But the words were wrong. No delivery service operated at this hour, and the speaker had a slight accent that might have been Eastern European. Sarah's mind immediately began cataloging possibilities. None of them good. She waited in silence, controlling her breathing the way she had been trained to do before engaging targets. After several minutes, she heard footsteps retreating down the hallway. A car engine started in the parking lot below, followed by the sound of tires on asphalt. Sarah remained in position for another 20 minutes before moving to check her security system. The camera she had installed showed a figure in dark clothing, leaving a small package by her door before disappearing into the stairwell. The person had kept their face turned away from the camera at all times, which suggested professional training. The package was still there when she finally opened the door, a small brown envelope with her name written in block letters. Inside was a photograph that made her blood run cold and her hands shake for the first time in months. The photograph showed Sarah in full combat gear, taken during a mission that officially never existed. She was crouched behind a concrete barrier, rifle raised, her face partially obscured by night vision goggles. But what made her hands tremble wasn't seeing herself in action again. It was the red circle drawn around a figure in the background. A man she had personally eliminated during that operation 3 years ago. Alexei Volkov had been an arms dealer with connections to terrorist cells across the Middle East. Intelligence had indicated he was planning to sell chemical weapons to groups that would use them against civilian populations. Sarah's team had been tasked with stopping the transaction and neutralizing all involved parties. The mission had been swift and surgical, leaving no survivors who could compromise future operations. Except somehow, someone had been watching. Someone had photographed the entire event, including Sarah's face, and now they were using it to send a message. The dead man in the background had friends, and those friends knew exactly who had killed him. Sarah burned the photograph in her kitchen sink, but the implications continued to burn in her mind. If someone had evidence of her involvement in classified operations, they could expose not just her, but entire networks of operatives who were still active in the field. The collateral damage would be catastrophic. Her phone rang at 4:30 a.m. The number was blocked, but she answered on the second ring. "Lieutenant Chen," a voice said in accented English. "I trust you received our message. What do you want?" Sarah kept her voice steady, falling back on interrogation training that taught her to reveal nothing through tone or inflection. "Your friends are alive for now. The sniper with the steady hands, the bomb expert who loves his family, the linguist who thinks he is so clever. They are enjoying our hospitality while we discuss terms." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. The caller knew details about her missing teammates that weren't public information. They had done extensive research, which meant this wasn't a random kidnapping or a simple revenge plot. This was organized, professional, and very personal. "Terms for what?" "You killed someone very important to us, Lieutenant. Someone whose death has caused considerable inconvenience to our business operations. We require compensation." "Money?" The laugh that came through the phone was cold and humorless. "Money is easy to replace. Expertise is not. You and your team disrupted a very profitable arrangement, and now you will help us rebuild it." Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. "What kind of help?" "The same kind you provided your government. Planning, logistics, leadership. You will use your considerable skills to facilitate certain transactions that your former employers have made unnecessarily difficult. It was a trap with no good exits. Refuse, and her former teammates would die. Agree, and she would be helping the same network she had spent years fighting." Either choice would haunt her for whatever remained of her life. "I need proof they're alive," she said. "Of course. Check your email in exactly 1 hour." The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in the pre-dawn darkness. She had 1 hour to think, to plan, to find some way out of an impossible situation. Her old commanding officer would have called it a no-win scenario, the kind of problem that military strategists study because there are only degrees of loss rather than any path to victory. She spent the hour making coffee and checking her weapons. The pistol was reliable but limited in a serious fight. Her rifle was locked in a gun safe in her bedroom closet, along with ammunition and equipment she had legally purchased, but hoped never to use again. If she was walking into a trap, she would at least be properly equipped. The email arrived precisely 60 minutes after the phone call ended. 3 video files, each showing one of her missing teammates. Marcus Webb was tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse, his face bruised but his eyes alert. Diana Foster was in a similar situation, though she had managed to maintain her composure despite obvious signs of interrogation. Tommy Nakamura looked the worst, with bandages on his hands that suggested his captors had tested his pain tolerance. All 3 were alive, but their condition made it clear that cooperation was not optional. Each video ended with the same message displayed on screen. 24 hours to decide. Further instructions will follow. Sarah closed her laptop and sat in her kitchen, watching the sunrise through her small window. She had 24 hours to choose between betraying everything she had sworn to protect or watching 3 good soldiers die because of missions they had completed in service to their country. The irony wasn't lost on her that her own government couldn't help her, since officially none of them had ever been where they clearly were in that photograph. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez, asking if she wanted to schedule their next therapy session. Sarah stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Whatever came next, it would require skills that had nothing to do with processing trauma and everything to do with creating it. She pulled out a pen and paper, an old habit from mission planning days when digital communications could be compromised. At the top of the page, she wrote 3 names: Webb, Foster, Nakamura. Below that, she began sketching everything she could remember about arms-dealing networks in the region where she had last operated. If her captors wanted her expertise, they were going to get it. But they had made a critical error in assuming that Lieutenant Sarah Chen had become a broken civilian who could be easily manipulated. They had forgotten that the most dangerous soldiers were often the ones who appeared to have nothing left to lose. By noon, she had filled 12 pages with tactical assessments, vulnerability analyses, and operational profiles. She knew more about their business than they probably realized, because disrupting criminal networks required understanding them completely. Every arms dealer her team had eliminated had been studied extensively before the mission began. What her captors didn't know was that Sarah Chen had never met a problem she couldn't solve with sufficient preparation and absolute commitment to action. They thought they were blackmailing a burnt-out veteran, but they had actually backed into a corner the one person who had spent years learning to turn impossible situations into tactical advantages. The real question wasn't whether she would save her teammates. The question was how many enemies would still be breathing when she finished the job. The second phone call came exactly 24 hours later, as promised. Sarah had used every minute of that time to prepare, transforming her apartment into a tactical operations center that would have made her old commanding officer proud. Maps covered her walls, marked with locations, routes, and potential strongholds. Her laptop displayed surveillance footage from traffic cameras near the last known locations of her missing teammates. "Have you made your decision, Lieutenant?" The same accented voice, calm and confident. "I need more information before I agree to anything," Sarah replied. "Specifically, I need to know what kind of operations you're planning and what resources you have available." A pause. "You are not in a position to make demands. Actually, I am. You came to me because you need someone with my skill set. That means you've already tried other approaches and failed. I'm not agreeing to help with something that will get us all killed because you haven't done proper reconnaissance." It was a calculated risk. But Sarah had learned long ago that showing weakness in negotiations only led to worse terms later. Professional criminals respected competence even from their enemies. "Very well. There is a shipping container arriving at the port of Long Beach in 6 days. It contains certain materials that our clients are eager to acquire. Your government has made the procurement of such materials unnecessarily difficult. Sarah knew he was talking about weapons, probably military-grade equipment that had been intercepted or confiscated. The Port of Long Beach was one of the busiest shipping centers in the United States, which made it both an attractive target and a security nightmare. What kind of materials? Surface-to-air missiles originally destined for a client in Yemen. The shipment was seized 3 months ago, but certain customs officials have proven amenable to reclassification errors. Sarah felt sick. Surface-to-air missiles in the wrong hands could bring down civilian aircraft or military helicopters. She had spent years preventing exactly this kind of weapons transfer, and now she was being asked to facilitate it. Where are my people? Safe for now. You will receive coordinates once you have proven your commitment to our arrangement. I'll need to see the shipping manifests and security protocols for the port. Also floor plans for any warehouses where the materials might be stored. You will have everything you need. Meet us tomorrow night at the address I am about to send you. Come alone and come unarmed. Sarah almost laughed at the last instruction. If her captors thought she would walk into a meeting defenseless, they had seriously underestimated her. But she kept her voice neutral as she confirmed the arrangements. After the call ended, she spent 2 hours studying everything she could find about the Port of Long Beach. Security was tight, but not impenetrable for someone who understood the weaknesses in large-scale operations. Container yards were monitored by cameras and patrols, but they covered thousands of acres and processed millions of shipments annually. The right person could disappear into that maze of steel and concrete. The address they had sent her was for a warehouse in an industrial district 20 minutes from the port. Sarah drove past it twice that evening, noting security cameras, lighting patterns, and potential escape routes. The building was surrounded by similar structures, most of which appeared to be legitimate businesses that closed after normal working hours. She spent the night preparing equipment she hoped she wouldn't need. Body armor that could be concealed under a jacket, a backup pistol small enough to hide in her boot, and a knife that wouldn't show up on basic metal detectors. If her captors planned to search her, they would find the obvious weapons and hopefully miss the less obvious ones. The meeting was scheduled for 9 p.m. the following night. Sarah arrived 30 minutes early and positioned herself across the street, where she could watch the warehouse without being seen. 3 vehicles were parked outside, including a black SUV with tinted windows that screamed federal enforcement or organized crime. At exactly 9 p.m., she walked to the front entrance and knocked. The door opened to reveal a man in his 40s with the build of someone who stayed in excellent physical condition. His eyes were hard and intelligent, the kind that missed nothing and forgot less. Lieutenant Chen, please, come in. The warehouse interior had been converted into an office space, with conference tables, computer equipment, and wall-mounted displays showing shipping schedules and port layouts. 4 other people were present, all armed and all watching her with the careful attention of professionals evaluating a potential threat. The man who had greeted her gestured toward a chair at the main conference table. I am Dmitry Kozlov. We have much to discuss. Sarah recognized the name from intelligence briefings. Kozlov was a former Russian military officer who had transitioned into private security work, which was a polite way of saying he sold violence to the highest bidder. If he was involved, this operation was significantly more dangerous than she had initially assessed. Before we begin, Kozlov continued, I want you to understand that we are not unreasonable people. Your friends are alive and well cared for. They will remain so as long as you fulfill your obligations. He gestured to one of his associates who activated a laptop connected to a large display screen. Live video feeds showed her 3 teammates in what appeared to be holding cells, but clean ones with adequate lighting and basic furniture. They are not being mistreated, Kozlov said, but their continued health depends entirely on your cooperation. Sarah studied the video feeds, looking for clues about location or conditions. All 3 of her teammates appeared alert and uninjured, which was encouraging. But she also noticed that each cell had multiple cameras, suggesting their captors were prepared for escape attempts. What exactly do you need from me? Kozlov smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The shipping container we discussed contains 12 Stinger missiles and associated equipment. Unfortunately, it is currently secured in a high-security warehouse where our usual methods of persuasion are ineffective. He activated another display showing detailed floor plans of the storage facility. Security checkpoints, guard rotations, camera placements, and alarm systems were all clearly marked. Someone had done extensive reconnaissance, or they had access to inside information. Your job is to develop a plan for acquiring these materials without triggering a federal investigation that would compromise our other operations in the region. Sarah studied the plans carefully. The warehouse was essentially a fortress, designed to prevent exactly the kind of theft they were contemplating. But every fortress had weaknesses, and she had spent years learning to find them. "This is a federal facility," she said finally. "Any breach will trigger massive law enforcement response, which is why we need someone with your expertise to ensure the breach appears to be an internal security failure rather than an external attack." It was actually a clever approach. If the theft looked like an inside job, investigators would focus on customs officials and warehouse employees rather than pursuing external criminal networks. The missiles would disappear into the black market, while federal agents wasted time interviewing people who had nothing to do with the actual operation. "I'll need access to personnel files for everyone who works in that facility," Sarah said. "Also shipping schedules for the next 2 weeks and maintenance records for all security systems." "Of course. Anything else?" Sarah looked around the room at the faces watching her. These were experienced criminals who had probably orchestrated dozens of similar operations. But they had one critical weakness. They still thought of her as a broken soldier who could be controlled through threats. "I'll need 48 hours to develop a preliminary plan, and I want to talk to my people before I commit to anything." Kozlov considered this for a moment. "Very well. You may speak with one of them for exactly 3 minutes. Choose wisely." Sarah chose to speak with Marcus Webb. Knowing his language skills and tactical thinking would allow him to communicate the most information in the shortest time. When his face appeared on the video screen, she could see the intelligence in his eyes despite the obvious stress of captivity. "Marcus, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Lieutenant. All 3 of us are. They've been treating us well considering the circumstances." His words were carefully chosen, but his eyes conveyed additional meaning. He was telling her they were being monitored, and that any rescue attempt should account for multiple hostiles. "Do you know where you are?" "Somewhere with a lot of industrial noise during the day. Trucks, machinery, that kind of thing. But it's quiet at night." He was giving her audio clues without being obvious about it. "Industrial area, probably near shipping or manufacturing facilities. Marcus, I need you to know that I'm going to get you out of this." "I know you will, Lieutenant. We all do. Just remember what you taught us about adapting to changing conditions." His subtle emphasis on the last words reminded her of a lesson she had drilled into her team. When a mission went sideways, the best response was often to completely change the tactical approach rather than trying to salvage the original plan. The video feed cut off after exactly 3 minutes, leaving Sarah staring at a blank screen. But the brief conversation had given her crucial information. Her teammates were being held in an industrial area, which narrowed down potential locations significantly. More importantly, Marcus had reminded her that she didn't have to play by her captor's rules. Kozlov was studying her reaction carefully. "As you can see, your friends are well. Now, shall we discuss the details of our operation?" Sarah spent the next hour reviewing the warehouse plans and security protocols. The facility stored high-value seized cargo for federal agencies, which meant it was designed to prevent both external theft and internal corruption. Multiple layers of security, redundant alarm systems, and strict access controls made it nearly impregnable through conventional approaches. But Sarah had never been conventional. "I can get you into that warehouse," she said finally. "But not the way you're thinking." Kozlov raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Every security system has maintenance requirements. Cameras need cleaning, sensors need calibration, alarms need testing. All of that work is done by outside contractors who have legitimate access to every part of the facility. You want to pose as maintenance workers? Better than that. I want to become maintenance workers. Real ones, with legitimate credentials and work orders that will get us through every checkpoint without raising suspicion." It was an ambitious plan that would require significant preparation. But Sarah had learned that the best way to infiltrate a secure facility was to be invited inside. Maintenance contractors were essentially invisible to security personnel, especially during routine service calls. How long would this take to arrange? 2 weeks minimum. maybe 3. You need time to establish a legitimate business, get the proper licenses, and build a service history that will pass background checks. Kozlov frowned. That seems unnecessarily complex. Our contacts in customs can simply redirect the container to a different warehouse. Your contacts will be the first people investigated if those missiles disappear. This way, the theft looks like a sophisticated external operation that bypassed all security measures. No one gets arrested, and you can use the same approach for future operations. Sarah could see him considering the advantages. A repeatable method for accessing high-security facilities was worth more than a single successful theft. But she also knew that every day of delay was another day her teammates remained in captivity. Very well, but your friends will remain our guests until the operation is complete. Sarah nodded, having expected nothing else. I'll need access to your computer equipment and some specialized software. Also a secure internet connection that can't be traced back to this location. Of course. Anything else? Yeah. I need to know why you really want those missiles. Kozlov's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested she had asked the right question. They are valuable cargo that can be sold to interested parties. Bullshit. Stinger missiles are useful for specific tactical situations, but they're not the kind of general-purpose weapons that bring top dollar on the black market. Someone has a specific target in mind. A long silence filled the warehouse. Sarah could feel the tension rising as Kozlov weighed his options. Finally, he gestured to his associates, who moved closer to her chair. You are very perceptive, Lieutenant. Yes, we have a specific client who requires these particular weapons for a particular purpose, but the details of that arrangement are not your concern. They are if you want my help. I'm not facilitating an operation that could result in civilian casualties on American soil. Who said anything about American soil? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah realized she was walking into territory that could get her killed regardless of how useful she might be to their plans. But she had to know what she was potentially helping to enable. Where? Kozlov studied her for a long moment before answering. There is a military transport scheduled to depart from Edwards Air Force Base in 10 days. It will be carrying certain personnel who have caused considerable difficulty for our client's business interests in Syria. Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. They were planning to shoot down a U.S. military aircraft, probably one carrying special operations personnel or intelligence officers. It was exactly the kind of operation that would justify massive retaliation and potentially escalate into open conflict. That's an act of war. That is business. Very profitable business for everyone involved. Sarah forced herself to remain calm, but her mind was racing through implications and possibilities. If she helped them acquire those missiles, good soldiers would die. If she refused, her teammates would die. Either choice would haunt her, but only one would result in mass casualties and potential international conflict. I need time to think about this. Of course, you have until tomorrow night to provide a preliminary plan. We will discuss final details once you have demonstrated your commitment to our arrangement. Sarah was escorted out of the warehouse by 2 armed men who made sure she understood the consequences of attempting to contact law enforcement. But as she drove back to her apartment, she was already planning an approach that Kozlov and his associates would never see coming. She had spent years learning to turn impossible situations into tactical advantages, and this situation was about to become very tactical indeed. Her captors thought they were blackmailing a broken soldier, but they had actually given a weapon a target and a reason to fight. The real Lieutenant Sarah Chen was about to remind them why enemies had once whispered her call sign in fear. And this time, she wouldn't be following anyone else's rules of engagement. Sarah spent that night transforming her apartment into a war room that would have impressed her old intelligence officers. Every piece of information she had gathered about Kozlov's operation was analyzed, cross-referenced, and mapped out on her walls. But unlike the careful planning she had done for military missions, this operation had to account for variables that officially didn't exist. She couldn't contact her former commanding officers because this situation involved classified operations that no one would acknowledge. She couldn't reach out to federal law enforcement because Kozlov's people were probably monitoring her communications, and she couldn't simply disappear because her teammates' lives depended on her continued cooperation. But Sarah Chen had built her reputation on solving problems that other people considered impossible. The first breakthrough came when she cross-referenced the industrial noise patterns Marcus had described. with shipping schedules for the port of Long Beach. Only 3 facilities in the area matched his description, and one of them was a defunct manufacturing plant that had been purchased 6 months earlier by a shell company with ties to Eastern European investors. The second breakthrough came from traffic camera footage she accessed through methods that were probably illegal but definitely necessary. A black SUV matching the one she had seen at the warehouse had been photographed entering and leaving the defunct plant multiple times over the past week, always during nighttime hours. By 3 a.m., Sarah had a target location and a preliminary understanding of her enemy's operational patterns. Now she needed allies, which meant reaching out to people who could help her without asking too many questions about why she needed help. She called Rodriguez at 6 a.m., knowing he would be awake for his morning workout routine. "Jen, Jesus, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I got your letter about the missing soldiers. We need to talk, but not over the phone. Are you in some kind of trouble? The kind that gets people killed if we handle it wrong."
Can you meet me at the usual place in 2 hours?
The usual place was a diner near Camp Pendleton, where they had often eaten breakfast during their stateside training rotations. It was public enough to discourage violence, but remote enough for private conversations. Rodriguez was already there when Sarah arrived, sitting in a corner booth where he could watch both entrances. The years since their last deployment had added gray to his hair and lines around his eyes, but he still carried himself like a soldier who could handle whatever came next. "You look like hell, Lieutenant." "I feel worse than I look, Miguel. I need you to listen carefully and not ask questions until I'm finished." She told him everything except the specific location where she believed their teammates were being held. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the implications became clear. "So they want you to help them steal military weapons so they can shoot down one of our planes." "That's the short version. Yeah, and if you refuse, they kill Webb, Foster, and Nakamura. Also the short version." Rodriguez was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup like it contained answers to impossible questions. Finally, he looked up at Sarah with the same expression he had worn during their most dangerous missions. "What do you need?" "Equipment. The kind we used to requisition for operations that required flexibility and tactical approaches." "How much flexibility?" "Enough to level a building if necessary." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I still have contacts who understand the importance of off-the-books logistics." "When do you need it?" "Tonight. And Miguel, once I do this, there's no going back. These people will know exactly who hit them, and they'll come after anyone who helped me. Then we better make sure none of them are left to come after anyone." It was the response Sarah had hoped for, but hadn't dared expect. Rodriguez understood that some situations required solutions that fell outside normal legal boundaries. More importantly, he trusted her judgment enough to commit to an operation without knowing all the details. They spent an hour planning logistics and communication protocols. Rodriguez would acquire the equipment and position himself as backup, while Sarah attended the meeting with Kozlov to maintain the pretense of cooperation. If everything went according to plan, they would extract their teammates and eliminate the threat before Kozlov's people could retaliate. If things went wrong, at least they would go down fighting instead of waiting to be killed. Sarah returned to her apartment to prepare for the evening's performance. She had to convince Kozlov that she was fully committed to helping with the weapons theft, while actually gathering intelligence for a rescue operation. It was the kind of deception that required complete emotional control and absolute confidence in her tactical abilities. She spent the afternoon drafting a legitimate-sounding plan for infiltrating the federal warehouse. The plan was detailed enough to demonstrate her expertise, but flawed enough to ensure it would fail if anyone actually tried to execute it. Kozlov's people would spend days identifying and correcting the problems, buying her time to locate and extract her teammates. The evening meeting was held in the same warehouse, but this time Sarah noticed details she had missed during her first visit. Emergency exits, electrical panels, structural weak points, and potential weapons that could be improvised from available materials. If the situation deteriorated rapidly, she wanted multiple options for fighting her way out. Kozlov reviewed her preliminary plan with obvious interest, asking detailed questions about timing, personnel requirements, and contingency procedures. Sarah answered everything with the confident professionalism of someone who had planned dozens of similar operations, which technically she had, This is excellent work, Lieutenant. I can see why your reputation preceded you. What reputation? Kozlov smiled, but again it didn't reach his eyes. You think we chose you randomly? We have been researching your background for months. Your former enemies speak of you with considerable respect, even fear. There are stories told in certain circles about the American woman who could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and disappear before reinforcements arrived. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. What stories? They called you Tikhaya Smrt, silent death. Your ability to eliminate high-value targets without leaving evidence made you legendary among people who traffic in violence. It was a call sign she hadn't heard in years, one that had been whispered in the shadows of operations so classified that even she didn't know all the details. Sarah had hoped that part of her life was buried along with the enemies who had feared her, but apparently some reputations never died. That was a long time ago. Perhaps, but we believe the skills that earned you that reputation are exactly what we need for our current project. The federal warehouse is defended against conventional attacks, but it was not designed to stop someone like Silent Death. Sarah realized she had walked into a trap more sophisticated than simple blackmail. Kozlov hadn't just kidnapped her teammates to force her cooperation. He had specifically targeted her because her unique skill set made their operation possible. Without someone who could infiltrate high-security facilities, their plan to acquire the missiles would never work, which meant they would never let her go, regardless of whether she cooperated or not. Once the operation was complete, she and her teammates would become liabilities who knew too much about Kozlov's capabilities and connections. When do we begin? Tomorrow. We have already begun establishing the maintenance company you suggested. By the end of the week, you will have legitimate credentials and work orders that will provide access to the warehouse. Sarah nodded, maintaining her facade of cooperation while her mind raced through revised tactical assessments. She had less time than expected, which meant the rescue operation would have to be moved up to tonight. Rodriguez would have to acquire equipment faster than planned, and she would have to locate her teammate's exact position within the industrial facility. But as she sat in that warehouse listening to Kozlov outline their timeline, Sarah Chen felt something she hadn't experienced in months. The familiar clarity that came when an impossible situation finally revealed its solution. Her enemies had made the classic mistake of believing their own propaganda about her psychological condition. They thought they were manipulating a broken soldier, but Silent Death had never been broken. She had just been waiting for a target worthy of her attention. The rescue operation began at 11 p.m., 3 hours after Sarah left the warehouse meeting. Rodriguez had positioned himself in an abandoned office building that provided overwatch of the defunct manufacturing plant where their teammates were being held. His military-grade optics confirmed what Sarah had suspected: 12 hostiles, rotating guard schedules, and multiple exit routes that would need to be secured. Sarah approached the facility from the east, using industrial equipment and storage containers for concealment. The body armor under her jacket felt familiar and reassuring, like putting on an old uniform that still fit perfectly. She carried minimal weapons, a suppressed pistol, tactical knife, and 3 flashbang grenades. But her real advantages were knowledge and experience that couldn't be countered by numbers or firepower. The perimeter security was competent, but predictable. Guards checked specific points at regular intervals. Cameras covered obvious approaches and motion sensors protected the main entrances, but every system had blind spots, and Sarah had spent years learning to find them in much more sophisticated installations. She reached the building's southeast corner without triggering any alarms, then used her knife to carefully remove a section of chain-link fencing that had been installed over a loading dock window. The opening was barely large enough for her to squeeze through, but it provided access to a storage area that wasn't covered by internal cameras. Her earpiece crackled with Rodriguez's voice. Overwatch to Silent Death. 2 guards on the north side, 1 patrolling the perimeter. You have approximately 4 minutes before the next security check. Sarah moved through the storage area toward the main facility, stepping carefully to avoid debris that might create noise. The building's interior had been partially renovated, with temporary walls dividing the space into smaller rooms. According to the intelligence she had gathered, her teammates were being held in converted offices on the 2nd floor. The first guard was positioned at the bottom of a stairwell, armed with an assault rifle, but more focused on his phone than his surroundings. Sarah approached from behind, using a blood choke that rendered him unconscious in less than 10 seconds. She zip-tied his hands and feet, then appropriated his weapon and radio. Guard Station 2 to control. All clear on level 1. Copy Station 2. Next check in 15 minutes. Sarah had 15 minutes to locate and extract 3 prisoners while avoiding 11 remaining hostiles. In her military days, those would have been considered favorable odds for someone with her training and experience. The second floor was laid out like a typical office building, with a central hallway connecting multiple rooms. Sarah could hear voices coming from the far end of the corridor, suggesting at least 3 guards were positioned near the holding area. She needed to eliminate them quietly to avoid triggering a general alarm. The first guard was standing outside what appeared to be a converted conference room. Sarah used her suppressed pistol, placing 2 round center mass from a distance of 20 feet. The silencer reduced the sound to barely more than a whisper, and the guard dropped without making any noise that might alert his colleagues. Overwatch to silent death. Movement on the north perimeter. Looks like they're moving to new positions. Copy. How many? 3 hostiles repositioning to cover the main entrance. You still have clear egress on the east side. Sarah continued down the hallway toward the voices, which were coming from an office at the far end. 2 guards were visible through an open doorway, both armed and alert. Taking them simultaneously would require precise timing and perfect shot placement. She activated one of her flashbang grenades, counting down the seconds before rolling it into the office. The explosion of light and sound disoriented the guards long enough for Sarah to enter and eliminate both targets with controlled pairs to the chest. The office connected to 3 smaller rooms that had been converted into holding cells. Marcus Webb was in the first one, secured with zip ties but otherwise uninjured. Sarah cut his restraints and handed him the assault rifle she had taken from the first guard. Jesus, Lieutenant. I knew you'd come, but I didn't expect you to take the whole place apart. We're not done yet. Where are Foster and Nakamura? Next 2 rooms. Foster's injured. They worked her over pretty good yesterday. Nakamura's been drugged, some kind of sedative to keep him compliant. Sarah found Diana Foster conscious but favoring her left side, where bruising suggested broken ribs. Tommy Nakamura was awake but disoriented, moving slowly and having trouble focusing. Neither would be combat effective, which meant Sarah and Webb would have to handle any remaining resistance. Overwatch to silent death. You've got problems. Large group of hostiles moving toward your building from the west. Looks like reinforcements. Sarah's mind raced through tactical options. The original plan had called for extracting her teammates and withdrawing before Kozlov's people could organize an effective response. But if reinforcements were arriving, they needed to either fight their way out immediately or find a defensive position and wait for better extraction opportunities. How many reinforcements? At least 8 vehicles. Maybe 30 people. This is turning into a full-scale operation. Sarah made the decision that separated professional soldiers from amateurs. When the situation changed, you adapted the mission rather than stubbornly pursuing the original plan. We're not leaving. We're going to finish this. Webb looked at her with confusion. Finish what? Kozlov has enough resources to hunt us down no matter where we go. The only way this ends is if he doesn't have resources anymore. She explained her revised plan while helping Foster and Nakamura prepare for movement. Instead of withdrawing, they would use the building's defensive advantages to eliminate Kozlov's forces systematically. The manufacturing plant had thick walls, multiple levels, and enough cover to make it a fortress for anyone who knew how to use terrain tactically. You want to fight 30 people with 4 soldiers, 2 of whom are injured? I want to fight 30 criminals with 4 operators who know what they're doing. There's a difference. Sarah positioned Webb to cover the main stairwell while she set up overlapping fields of fire from the second-floor windows. Foster, despite her injuries, took a position where she could provide sniper support with a rifle appropriated from one of the eliminated guards. Nakamura was given simple tasks that didn't require complex decision-making, while the sedatives worked out of his system. The first assault came 20 minutes later, with 6 attackers trying to breach the main entrance simultaneously. They were met with coordinated fire from multiple positions that eliminated half their number before they could establish cover inside the building. The survivors withdrew, but Sarah knew they would try a more sophisticated approach next time. Overwatch to silent death. They're spreading out for a coordinated assault. Looks like they're going to hit you from 3 directions. Copy. Light them up when they move. Rodriguez had positioned himself with a scoped rifle that could reach targets up to 800 meters away. When Kozlov's forces began their coordinated assault, they found themselves caught between defensive fire from the building and precision, shooting from an unexpected direction. The battle lasted 47 minutes and ended when Kozlov himself tried to negotiate a ceasefire. Sarah's response was a single sniper round that eliminated him from 600 meters away, fired by Foster despite her injured condition. In the aftermath, as emergency responders arrived to deal with the carnage, Sarah and her team simply disappeared into the industrial maze surrounding the plant. By dawn, they were miles away, and by the following evening, they had scattered to different states using identities that would never be connected to the night's events. 3 months later, Sarah received a text message from an unknown number. Package delivered safely. Client very satisfied with results. She deleted the message and returned to her morning coffee, watching the sunrise through her new apartment window. The nightmares had stopped. Her leg didn't hurt anymore, and for the first time in months she felt like herself again. The woman who had been dismissed as a burnt-out soldier was once again the person enemies whispered about in fear. But now she had a new mission, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves from threats their own government couldn't acknowledge. Silent Death was back in business, and this time she was working for herself.